Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. In this special All Things Canada edition, I'm going to be joined by two guests to talk about the recent Canadian federal elections that took place April 28th, 2025 of this year. We'll be doing an election autopsy and how does the left in Canada advance itself? Because while the Conservatives didn't get the huge political comeback many feared, the Liberals, who I think are, to quote the late Glen Ford, the more effective evil, have triumphed. It is still a minority government, but a strong minority government. And this episode will explore what happened, where does the left go from here, and explores other factors and try to make sense of what happened because the NDP has lost official party status. And talk about a minority government, the NDP are less than that at the moment. So who better to do an election autopsy than our returning champion, Barry Weisleder of Socialist Action Canada and a member of the NDP Socialist Caucus and Workers' Alliance movement, right, Barry? Or
Well, the Municipal Socialist Alliance or the Workers' Action Movement. It's
yeah,
two
Workers'
different
Action
organizations.
Movement. Yes, the Workers' Action Movement, which tries to get leftists in positions of power in the unions so they can wham it to the bosses. And we are also
Yeah.
joined by Bhagwant Sandu. He is a leftist and a left-wing activist in his own right, involved in various people power movements, including the anti-imperialist movement, and he writes opinion pieces for the Hill Times. And let's get underway. So, gentlemen, welcome to the both of you.
Thank you, Youri.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
It's an honor to have you both. And just before we get underway, just a reminder, folks, to share One Plus One's content, share our past and present episodes, share our playlist dedicated to African history, Eastern European history, and current affairs. Our coverage on Canadian topics, Israel, historic Palestine, queer liberation, Latin American affairs, Indigenous topics from Turtle Island, Australia to New Zealand and elsewhere, and our collection of interviews with guests like Joe Emersberger, Margaret Kimberly, Dimitri Lascaris, Rick Sterling, Alfred Desaias, Boyan Stanislavski, and Mogajata Kubchaska Forgets, L. Jones, and Bernita L. Haynes. Please share all of that and donate generously if you can to One Plus One, or however much you feel you can donate. We're entirely independent media, so any donation is greatly appreciated. And now, on to the topic at hand. My first question is to you, Bhagwan, which is because it's your first time on the show. So let's first go to you. So overall, explain what took place on the 28th, and what are your overall impressions about what happened? Are you shocked that the Liberals are still retaining power? And if not shocked, do explain why. And my follow-up question to that is: do you feel, despite the argument that this is a liberal minority government, that this is a huge setback for the left, given the NTP have never been they have been, quite frankly, wiped out. This is the second huge historic defeat since the Audrey McLaughlin period or Alexa McDonough period. There is no NDP or Bloc Québécois to hold on to the Liberals on a leash or provide some much needed pushback, especially given that the Liberals and Conservatives are not that much different regarding taxing super wealthy of Canada, pipelines, not understanding the science that it says keep fossil fuels in the ground if we want to live on Earth peacefully, slavish devotion to NATO and the pivot to Asia, advancing corporate Canada's imperialism elsewhere, especially that of the mining industry. So I'm curious your thoughts on the election and all I've just laid out.
Okay, so I'll take a minute because there's a lot to sort of discuss and to deconstruct, as it were. But I think when you look at the current Canadian election, there's a number of sort of factors. I'm not necessarily there saying that they are relevant, but they are factors that played out. Clearly, one was Donald Trump and his not just becoming president, but his interventions in Canada and the kind of aggressive tone with Canada, more than just a tone, in fact, imposition of tariffs, which he did, during the sort of election period. So that's one factor that I think we need to kind of expose. The second, I think, is also the fact that the liberals, to their credit, managed to get rid of Justin Trudeau, who was highly popular. If you look at his personal
Highly
popularity,
unpopular.
sorry,
Highly unpopular, you mean?
highly
Justin Trudeau was
unpopular.
highly unpopular.
Yeah, I think that's what I said, but yeah, highly
Yeah.
unpopular. I'll slow down. I speak too fast.
Okay.
And if you look at his personal popularity numbers, that is the number of people who like him versus who don't like him. That's called sort of, personal popularity. He actually was about, I say, latter half of last year. He had never climbed above 25, so he was negative 25. And to get rid of him uh, opened up all kinds of electoral possibilities for the liberals. So Trudeau factor was one thing. Donald Trump was another thing. The fourth aspect to this was Mark Carney himself, the presentation of Mark Carney as a relatively calm technocrat. In age, he's the more mature of all the other leaders. He's older, as well as the lead up to him becoming prime minister was also a fairly rigorous liberal leadership campaign in which you saw another. In fact, I would say, other than of the four or five candidates, there was only one who was relatively young. Krista Freeland, Frank Baylis were also people in their, let's say, late 40s, if not Frank, for example, is in the 60s. So it brought a different tone to political discourse in Canada. So that was the third element.
Yeah.
There was another fourth element, and that has to do with Pierre Poilievre himself and the conservatives writ large. They had spent most of 2024, if not the last 2 years, pretty much kind of honing in on Trudeau, the brand of Trudeau, the political brand of Trudeau, hammering at him like constantly. In fact, the last session of Parliament, when they sitting of Parliament rather, what started in September to pretty much, let's say, January, they was complete filibustering. Nothing was passed, nothing was debated, nothing was discussed, and it would be constantly Poilievre saying, "When are you going to call the election? When are you going to call the election?" He was name calling Jagmeet Singh, who was the leader of the NDP, as Shifty Singh, and all these
Sellout
kinds of
sing. Yeah,
really
exactly. Yeah.
populist, I would say, right-wing populist tactics of name calling, belligerence, stalling, kind of over aggression in terms of presentation of himself, being a kind of like a macho cool guy, if that's cool in that world. But so that was a Pierre Poilievre factor that the rug got pulled under him by the other things. So he was not able to transition fast enough to see that, okay, the landscape has changed and we need to have a different strategy. So that was the fourth element. And the fifth element, with respect to your foundational question, vis-a-vis the left, as it were, it is the NDP and the really the process that the NDP had been on. I would say pretty much kind of like the dying days of Jack Layton, and then certainly with Tom Mulcair, who, at that time, democratic socialism was a bad word, right? Forget about the socialist wing of the NDP. I mean, I don't think they would have gotten an invitation to the cocktail parties. So that changed completely. It became sort of liberal light, okay? And then when Jagmeet Singh comes on the scene, which is, early on, he's run two elections. I think he ran the 2019, three elections. He comes on the scene, and he also isn't coming from the world of, the working class. If you look at his, I've read his book. It's worth reading. He comes from a relatively well-off family, which nothing wrong with that, but the life experience isn't one of, working in a shop floor or retail or service industry or nothing like that, right? It is mostly, even when he goes through the leadership and subsequently is a kind of like a urban uh, identity around his Sikhism and kind of cool socialism with, Rolex watch. This is kind of almost like a in your face type of thing to people who actually have to slog for a living. And that you put that together, and then you look at simultaneously what's happening with the conservatives. And there's a really great book. I went to the to the book launch actually by Martin Lucas. It's called The Polyev Project, a
Yes,
radical
yes, I'm
blueprint
hoping
for
to get a
corporate
copy
growth.
of that book in the future. Yeah.
Well, I have it right here. It's signed by him too. And it's a great book. And he actually goes to great length explaining how the conservatives, and particularly starting with Aaron O'Toole, who had started, if you remember, Aaron O'Toole was actually making overtures to blue collar workers, unionized workers. And then Polyev takes it to the next level. Okay. So much so that in the last election, if you look at the kind of the industrial heartland of Canada from, we say, Hamilton, Windsor, Northern Ontario, British Columbia, the Vancouver Island, so forth. I mean, that's all hard NDP territory with really strong candidates. So Matthew Green, Nikki Ashton, like, I mean, they get wiped out. So there's a shift that starts to happen. Now, it's debatable whether they were just enamored by Polyev and just said, "Oh, we want him in power," or, and here's a thing that I personally observed, uh, which is I am in a riding where it's basically between the Liberals and the NDP. So in Ontario, and the last election, the federal provincial election, the NDP just, I mean, took it to like 80%, like huge margin of victory, right? Which was only about 3 months ago.
Yeah.
The NDP candidate, very strong candidate, very strong kind of, formerly a PhD, formerly with the Canadian Labour Congress and so forth, a former member of the provincial legislature on top of it. And he had beaten actually provincially the current federal Liberal contestant. So in other words, his credentials were very strong. And
Mhm.
yet he got something like 13% of the vote. And this is not even an industrial area, right? Or where you could just as unionized work. I mean, there's government workers. So you would think that they would come out for him at least. Didn't happen. And I think what happened was, and this is something that we have to really kind of think through a bit more than to have sort of easy solutions. Yes, of course, the NDP has not resonated. It's been sort of outcast. That's happened before. That happened with Preston Manning, with the reform movement. I mean, they know when to go to the working class, and which they did. But this time around, there was another phenomena, and which I witnessed. I mean, when you go to the various election celebration parties and whatnot, and when they announced the result, it was surprising that when they said Mark Carney forms government, they didn't say majority, they said government, the CBC did. And there was a shout of joy because no, this is really important because it wasn't Trump per se. It was the fear of Polyev cutting into power. So a
Yeah, yeah.
lot of the NDP vote, the leftist vote, actually went to the liberals because the kind, and it would be say almost like a principled action, if you will, political action, that it was to stop Polyev from gaining. Because in the last about a week or so before the election, it was emerging almost a neck to neck race. So I think that is a factor as well. So a bunch of things going on, and I'll let my colleague actually do his intervention, and we can discuss about what's next.
Actually, Barry, before I get some, before I get your reactions, I have a follow-up question to Bhagwan, which I want which I want both you and Bhagwan to answer, which is, can I just say I'm still surprised that Mark Carney got to where he is, because if you watched the two debates, the French language debates dubbed in English for English speakers, and you watch the English language debates, I have to, and I have to say this, even as a leftist, I was very impressed with Jagmeet Singh. I thought it was the best debate performance he has ever done in his whole career. Uh, Bloc Québécois Yves Francois Blanchet, I thought did well. Pierre Poilievre, I thought did fairly well in advancing his response to Trump's threats of annexing Canada and stuff like that. The one I was least impressed with the most, the one you could completely forget about in the entire debate, was yours truly, Mark Carney. And even when Mark Carney actually was in the Liberal Party leadership race, I thought he was the most least impressive compared to, Chrystia Freeland, Karina Gold, and and another gentleman who ran on, a strong healthcare, and so forth, whose names I'm blanking out. So is it safe to say, because whether we like it or not, corporate media, state media does have an influence on the electorate? Would you safe to say, is it safe to say that Mark Carney, one of the reasons why many people felt, okay, I'm going to vote for this guy, or I'm going to tactically vote for this guy, is because of the media, and the media propping him up as this technocratic liberal who knows how to steer a chaotic world, and so forth? Bhagwant, I'm curious your response, followed by Barry. On that.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I would differ with you slightly, just because of the way I look at problems and how I analyze them. I'm trying to come from more structural and institutional underlying you know things that are going on. So with Carney, yes, we could debate that whether he was good or bad in his terms of performance. I personally think he actually was, for the job that needed to be done, and I'll get to that in a second. He actually outshone the others. He came into the remember that his credentials aren't just sort of on paper. Stephen Harper had asked him to run for finance minister. He had appointed Stephen Harper had appointed him to the governor of the Bank of Canada, right? So he's seen as a savior by even Trudeau himself, because he wants him to come in as be the finance minister and maybe save his sinking ship. So when he comes in, it's his backbench MPs. There's over 50 of them that say, we're with you. So when you look at the announcements that, I'm running, look at who's behind who. Okay. So Frank Baylis is the name that you were forgetting.
Yeah.
He had zero MP support. And what did he come in? He came in last in the leadership. Then the next small number was Christina Freeland. No, not Christina Gould. Karina Gould. And she gets 1% more than Baylis. And then it's Chrystia Freeland, who is, knife Trudeau in the back. I mean, there's a soap opera drama going on. And she gets, majority of her MPs are people who are not running again. Okay. She comes in, she gets about 8%. Carney took it by 85%. Okay. So it wasn't just the corporate media, it was the Liberal Party rank and file thinking, where is their next meal ticket? And the meal ticket was absolutely with Carney. So he didn't just sort of come in and plant it. He came in with having played the game really well. Okay. Having had the support, the guards on the right and left and the front shooters and whatnot. So he came in really, really well. Now, in terms of the debates, I watched both the debates. I mean, all of them, the leadership ones, the four of them, I suppose, English, French, so forth. I can understand French. And if you look at the English in particular, because the French has all kinds of nuances going on, like they're playing different games of language and whatnot,
exactly.
And in that one, actually, I would say Carney did quite well. He has some conjugation problems, but Poilievre actually did horribly, because his audience, he misjudged his audience, right? So he could have great French, but his content was just crappy and it did not resonate at all. Okay, that's a separate thing. The English one, however, is very interesting. If you look at the English one and put aside the fact of, who's talking substance. Yeah, you could just say, well, I mean, which is classic NDP sort of, well, we really talk policy, and well, that's great. However, when you look at the presentation, the image, and I remind you that Donald Trump, he had said live in front of millions of people watching, oh, they're eating cats and dogs, and he got elected. So in other words, it's not necessarily about how informed, how articulate, how intelligent you are. It is what you're presenting. And there are several moments when there's a one-on-one between Carney and Poilievre. And you'll see Poilievre trying to goad him. And Carney just he actually doesn't even look at him. Doesn't answer. It's just a simple question. And he kind of goes on his thing. So he's projecting once again this, whether by accident, whether by spontaneously, or I suspect by a lot of scheming and planning and preparation, he's projecting a kind of a quiet, mature confidence, okay, that when they have the question about you can ask him a question, like they're all allowed to ask each other a question. And he asked about why didn't he get security clearance for the for CSIS for to see foreign interference. And the guy's going on and on and on, and he's just he's kind of looking that he's not even acknowledging. And that's a kind of exuding a kind of winner mentality, a kind of, and you can see that if you watch from just how, think of soap operas and movies, because to a large, the corporate media's role primarily here is to present the movie. Oh, look how close. Oh, look at it. He's coming back. He's going up. So to have us glued to the TV. And in that, you can see that the guy's struggling, but he's not, right? So he played it better. And so I think that there was a number of things that as a lead up, as a support base around him, as the intelligentsia, as a liberal, election readiness team, we were far more on the spot than outdated mindset of Polyev, his campaign manager, who in fact just a month before the election is called, she's beating up her own conservatives for being too focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and defending Christians and kind of the social issues, identity issues, when they really ought to be talking about Trump and maybe things that are on top of mind of Canadians. So that's my view.
Interesting. Yeah, Barry, do you think that the corporate media, and when I talk about corporate media, I'm talking mostly Global TV, CTV, and CBC in selling Mark Carney, your response, and just in general, your general impression on what took place, the NDP, the huge NDP loss, and so forth.
I think we need to step back and look at some bigger factors and trends operating in the political economy.
Okay.
And not how someone fared in the debates or what color suit they were wearing or what kind of French they employed in the discussion. The business class decided that wealth must be redistributed from the working class to the capitalist class. This is the determination, particularly in Washington, by the Trump regime. But it was, even if Trump had not gained election to a second term, it would have been advanced by the Democrats because they operate pretty much on the same basis. They are funded by the same interests. The U.S. imperialists, in this case led by Trump, have shifted towards what? They've shifted towards war. Trump wants to force all the countries of the world, in particular the main competitors, in particular China, to pay Washington for the privilege of being able to access the U.S. market and to be able to afford a bloated military apparatus in order to keep most of the world in a state of terror.
Yeah.
That Washington will lash out. And there's nothing more dangerous than an injured large animal with sharp teeth. Injure such a beast and watch out, because anything can happen and probably will. Now, given the main orientation of the economic elite towards shifting the surplus value created in production and distribution from one class to another, from the bottom up, from the working class and the less affluent sections of society to the upper strata. In that framework, Carney beat the conservatives with their own agenda. The carbon tax, gone. There's still the industrial carbon tax, but that'll be going quickly. You mark my word. All in favor of pipelines for oil and gas. To hell with the environment. The East-West energy corridor is supposed to be a really sexy idea, but it's just back to the old Canadian Pacific Railway. This country, given its geographical territorial dimensions and the distribution of the population along the southern band of the border, with the great power to its south, this is nothing new. This is simply an effort to exploit the natural resources, and to be able to do so. And there's a lot of talk about, one economy rather than 13 economies to take down the interprovincial barriers. What this really means is subordinating the interests and the rights of indigenous people, subordinating and just deterring the rights of people who want clean air, who want transportation, who want jobs that don't deliver an early grave, that are fulfilling and that are be able to live a relatively healthy and long life, in accordance with, the level of affluence of a country that has robbed the rest of the world, particularly the mining sector, a colonial settler state. So the carbon tax is gone, drill, baby, drill, northern version of the text. The inclusion tax on the ultra rich, gone. These were the first two things that Carney did when he assumed office. Eliminating the carbon tax, which was Poilievre's policy, remember, and canceling the inclusion tax on the ultra rich. Now, what does that matter? It matters greatly if you care at all about healthcare, education, environmental protection. All of this requires money to, it wouldn't require so much money if we had a government that was determined to expropriate the polluters and to make them pay for the mess that they've made in the environment. But we don't have such a government. So then it amounts to bribing corporations to reduce their pollution, their impact on the environment just a wee bit. And we're not even going to get that. There's going to be a radical expansion of the carbon energy sector. And then there are other themes that Carney picked up. Crime. Did you know that there's a massive crime wave which is killing people by the million? Did you know that immigration is a huge problem? Not that there's a labor shortage, particularly in the construction trades, but generally speaking, the immigrants are responsible for everything wrong with the country. Now, where did we first hear this? We heard it from the People's Party, and then we heard it from Poilievre, and now we're hearing it from the Liberals. Military spending. The biggest opposition parties in the election campaign, the Liberals and the Conservatives, were competing with each other. How much more should we spend on the military? How much more should we spend on membership in NATO? How much more should we spend on the F-35s, the super jets? Well, according to the Liberals, we need to have those jets. Of course, they would be useless in a war with the United States. The Canadian military would be absolutely useless in a war with the United States if there was an invasion, because the United States commands NATO. The United States has the switch for the jets, whether they are going to work or not going to work, because they may be deployed against intruding American fighter jets. So military spending. So what does this all add up to? It adds up to a convergence, not a divergence, but a convergence of the Liberals and the Conservatives. Then you come down to the relatively minor factors of personality. One has a nicer personality than the other. Poilievre is an ideological nerd, who's been for 20 years in Parliament, grooming himself, as a self-promoting. Okay, I'm not going to use any nasty language. Grooming himself for the position that he did not attain. So in the face of this convergence of the two, how do you account for the loss of votes from the NDP and the Greens towards the Liberals and the Conservatives? Oh, because here's where the media comes forward as a factor. The media portrayed this as a two-party race. And the Liberals, of course, did a reversal. They overcame a 20%. They were 20% below the Conservatives, almost in a tie with the NDP. But then they surged with the removal of Justin Trudeau, as has been explained already. Why did the NDP do so poorly? Well, partly because of that two-way race mantra that was chanted day and night, 1,000 times a day, in the major media. But this was explained fairly well in a column in the Toronto Star by is it Alan Gregg, the pollster, and he said the
Oh, yeah,
NDP
yeah,
is
yeah,
seen
yeah.
as
Exactly. Former progressive conservative on top of that. Yeah.
uh-huh, and the NDP is seen as, he said, an incrementalist defenders of the status quo. And he said the NDP and the Liberals both are portrayed as incrementalist defenders of the status quo. And if you're going to vote for the status quo, you might as well vote for the Liberal Party, which has a larger tent, so to speak. I think that's a deplorable term, tent,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
because of its lack of precision. But it has a greater capacity to fool a larger strata of people on both its left and its right flank. So the problem was more than merely a problem with Trump fear and the deployment of strategic voting, although it undeniably was a factor. It was the supply and confidence agreement in which the NDP propped up the Liberals for over 2 years. Now, the NDP got some concessions in terms of a drug plan, health, dental plan. These were introductory plans, by the way. This is not fully fledged. There was the dental plan is still, supported by payments. Some of the people who will be requiring the service.
And provinces still need, and there's still
Means tested. They call it
between,
means tested.
and also still negotiations between the federal government and the provinces, correct?
Yeah, and they could also flounder, and the whole thing, could be postponed, if not, or deterred, or even canceled. But anyway, some of it has begun with hesitation. So the NDP propped up the Liberals for 2 years, 2.5 years, to get the entree to these kind of healthcare improvements. And they are important. I don't want to suggest that they're not important. They are important. I use one of them myself. But, the thing is, what was the cost associated with that? Well, the cost was supporting the Liberal budgets. How many Liberal budgets were approved, prior to the calling of the federal election? 2 or 3, by my reckoning. And that meant supporting more military spending, that more subsidies to the oil and gas sector. It meant, well, when Trump started to bark, more RCMP and soldiers on the borderline to enforce
Yeah.
Absolutely idiotic policy with respect to drug control and not authorized to cross the border in order to seek separate from neoliberal capitalism. The NDP brass didn't present a vision that spoke to the insecurities, the dismay, not to mention the misery of ordinary people, the houseless, and those who live in their parents' basement because they can't afford to put a down payment on a house. These people were not addressed. And so it became, well, there's a problem of affordability, but we'll talk about that later. We have to stop Donald Trump. Well, I agree we have to stop Donald Trump, but it's inherent in that resolve to stop Donald Trump is to motivate the working class, which is 85% of the population, whether it's self-conscious of its class status or not, to play a role, to take the historical stage, and to fight for a new society. Now, I'm not suggesting that socialist revolution is on the agenda, but the idea of accommodating a trade war with countervailing tariffs, rather than appealing to American and Mexican workers to forge a united front to stop the tariff bosses, the trade war bosses. That's the course that the NDP and the Canadian Labour Congress could have taken, should have taken, but failed to take. So they didn't offer a distinct political project. Now, if the NDP turned left according to the prescription I'm offering viewers today. It might not have attained a higher vote. Was it 6.7%? It might have been, but it would have been more meaningful. That lower vote would have been more meaningful. And in the last days of the campaign, did you notice that Jagmeet Singh used the 5-letter word increasingly? Class. He said, "I'm here for the working class. I'm here for you." Well, sorry, Pierre is already playing that harp. You missed your chance.
Wow.
What did the NDP campaign concentrate on providing? The money. They spent millions of dollars on TV ads, not as much as the other parties, but still a tidy sum of money was spent. What did they concentrate? The images of Jagmeet Singh, tying up his hair in his turban, like here's the guy who's your neighbor, who you can trust because there's nothing hiding under that turban. He's just a regular guy, and he wants you to identify with him. Well, of course, we need more people of color and women and LGBTQ plus people, but that's not a program. That's identity politics, and it's not unimportant because it's symbolically significant. But we live under a colonial settler state ruled by white capitalists. That's a shame. But it's not sufficient simply to concentrate on the image of the leader of the fourth party in order to make headway in the context of a trade war and hot wars in Ukraine, in Gaza, Palestine. They completely missed the mark. Now, it's true that Jagmeet did prodded the other party leaders to admit during the television debates in French and in English, to admit that there's a genocide. And Polyev wouldn't touch it. And Carney said, "Oh, I don't want to politicize the term." What the hell? Politicize the term? People are dying in their tens of thousands, and he wouldn't admit that there's a genocide that the International Judicial Court has already said is underway, or is potentially underway, which disturbed a lot of the right wing internationally. Instead of a leader focus, and instead of the centralization of power in the party, which laid the basis for this deplorable NDP campaign, a centralization that Jack Layton initiated, relying on opinion polls and allowing the brain trust at the top of the federal NDP to appoint candidates and to exclude pro-Palestinian candidates and anyone who utters the words public ownership. We're seeing the consequences of that orientation, that posture by the NDP. So, I don't think it's about Trump's aggressive tone. I don't think it's primarily about Trudeau's unpopularity. It's about a convergence around a ruling class agenda that the NDP failed to identify in the early going or even months before the election. And the NDP has been downgrading. This is for the labor movement and the NDP. I know someone's going to say, well, a lot of unions were supporting the Conservatives and the Liberals, but these were locals, not the headquarters of the major unions that are affiliated to the NDP, like the United Food and Commercial Workers, the United Steel Workers, CUPE, and many others. No, locals, the trades, locals of this and that union, bought the conservative option, but not, the NDP remains a mass working class, labor-linked political party, and that's where the solution is going to be debated. Notice I didn't say where the solution is going to be found. That's where the solution is going to be debated. We do need a revolutionary socialist mass party, but we are far from being able to foster such a thing, to generate such a thing. So the debate has to occur in the existing working class organizations, not the ones that we might dream about. In the existing working class organizations, that means a big fight is going to take place in the unions and in the NDP. And this is an opportunity. Sometimes opportunities are born in dismal electoral results. an opportunity for the radical left, if it has the sense to get into the NDP with the Socialist Caucus and fight against the failed orientation and policy of the party leadership. This is an opportunity. The party brass and the NDP caucus are weaker. Why? Losing official party status means what? It means a loss of staff. Big loss of staff and resources in parliament. And the NDP brass, the pro-capitalist bureaucrats that run the party against the working class, not for the working class, live for that. For them, that's the breath of life. These positions that they want to occupy, as the secretary to this critic for the Department of, Foreign Affairs or economic development or whatever, and they've lost that. So they're weaker. We have the opportunity to fill that partial void, and that's my recommendation.
Thank you for all that, Barry. But I need both you and Bhagwant to explain something to me, which is this stupid idea of tactical voting. I call it own goaling, and I call it counterproductive voting and counter-revolutionary voting. Now, there's lots to criticize about the NDP, and I don't even want to get into that because I think it's boring at this point to always point out the NDP doesn't do this, the NDP doesn't do that, the NDP's not as left as Marx or as left as Engels. I get all of that. But that being said, the NDP is the party, or should be the party, which is what I call a constructive protest vote against liberals and conservatives, the once mighty progressive conservatives, but now, the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party. And I just do not understand how, if you're a leftist, or if you call yourself, a leftist, a socialist, or even folks who say, I'm an NDP supporter, how you can vote for the Liberal Party as because you think the Liberal Party is lesser evil compared to the Conservative Party, when this is what the Liberal Party has done throughout their throughout their time in office. So we have seen so if we talk about Israel, for example, given the lengths of evil and barbarity Israel has shown towards the Palestinian people, that has saw for 2 years now, going on 3 wonderful historic protests worldwide, nationwide in Canada. Montreal alone has broken records of still consistently weekly and weekend protests against Israel's genocide. And
Toronto as well.
Yeah, and Canadian complicity in that. And given the new levels of consciousness that people have in wanting to tie the struggle of Palestine to Canadian imperialism in Sudan, Congo DRC, Haiti, and elsewhere, that the Liberal government, it's obvious that the Liberals are even worse than the Conservatives in many respects. The Liberal government, this Liberal government has been worse than the Harper-era Conservative government of the 2000s when we talk about issues like climate change. The Liberals in the 90s and the early 2000s were even more savage than the Mulroney period of Reaganomics and Rogernomics that saw mass privatizations in the first major waves of austerity. Yet, the Liberals weren't given the red card, and one can argue whether a Liberal victory over the Conservatives is blocking evil, but it just seems Canada, it just seems as if Canada really does believe in lesser evil politics. So, given that, but also rising income inequality, a housing crisis in which both the Liberals and the Tories have no clear plan how to help working class families and small precarious middle class families get in. Are you both shocked that the Liberals are still given another chance and an increase in their minority government? Your response, Bob, got followed by Barry.
Bhagwan, go ahead, because I spoke at length.
Okay, thank you. I'll just preface by first saying that for me, whenever I'm kind of analyzing things or discussing in a public forum, I go with a great book by Mark Fisher called Capital Realism. I don't know if you read it. And I think that has to be
I'll have to get a copy of it.
okay. It's a must read because it basically says is that, we can dream and talk and whatever, but we live in capitalism. It's a fact. Okay.
Yeah.
Whether it's the corporations, whether it's a state that's become capitalist, vis-a-vis China, Vietnam, whatnot, or whether it's just corporation or individuals or plutocrats, but that's a reality. So in that reality, things are going to happen in that box. That's the God of capital is running us. It's going to happen in a certain way. All right. Now we could sit here and say, well, it shouldn't, or here's a great alternative that I have, and I'm going to. But today we're talking about is a liberal government victory, a forming government party. We have to start said it's within the confines of this box. That's a reality. Within the confines of the box, then it becomes far more interesting on who's doing what to win the game. So if you play chess, the rules are straight up. So the rules right now, for the moment, are this capitalism. So then that means that how do I play that game to get to win? Okay, do the checkmate. And if my checkmate is going to be, as Barry said, my first introductory video, okay, when the election starts, the very first introductory video is, well, look, underneath the turban, I have hair, and I'm punching a bag. What the hell? Like, that's almost as if I've been asleep at the wheel, and I'll start on this. And mind you, yes, you can say whatever about Trump, but Trump has been building it up. It was not a surprise by the time that the election period got rolled in. So what was going on in the minds of the great thinkers in the NDP caucus or the back benches, the back rooms, drumming up the thing? And I absolutely agree with Barry on that point as well, that in fact, I remember very vividly the first time I had written a piece on where I criticized Polyev for using words like he used to say average Canadians, the common people. And I found that offensive because what the hell does common mean? Like, or average? Like, that means that you're above average and the average is the people, struggling over here. So I had just made a thing saying that, these are working class people. And, I'm not taking any credit for it, but almost overnight, you started hearing the term working class. He actually used working class only from there on. And we never heard the word average people, regular people. He used to say regular,
right.
average, common Canadian.
That's
Working
right.
class. Jagmeet Singh, in the how many years he's been, I have never heard him even use the term working class or let alone class even. Like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now
But you know why? If I can just
well,
jump in, he was
but
losing. He was losing 15% in the polls. He was now speaking to his hardcore base, and we have a button in the NDP Socialist Caucus. I'm going to show it to you now.
Turn left.
To survive, the NDP must turn left. So when the survival of the NDP became an issue, it had to turn left.
Yeah,
that's the reason, which shows that we've been right all along.
No, and just so let me just I want to make a couple of other points. I think on that point as well, Barry is right that the way politics is played in Canada, I would say probably around the world, but certainly in Canada, is my country where I know best, is that you start with base politics, right? Which is what the Conservatives are very good. The Conservatives started with base politics. Their base was being eroded by the People's Party, the kind of far right ideologues of Maxime Bernier. So, when Polyev shows up at the convoy and is offering them coffee and donuts and whatnot, he basically squeezed out the Maxime Bernier. Maxime Bernier got 0.7% of the vote. He used to get, in the last two elections, 5 to 7%, wiped it out, okay? And then he goes then to build on it, once having secured the base. On the NDP side, the base becomes an afterthought. It's sort of when things are going south, and when you say, well, at least hang on to the base, right? So there's these factors like this at play. And I also would remind you that, despite all our discussion here too, the NDP is either in government or is the opposition party in at least 6 provinces. So it's not like, a failure of anything, or, pack your marbles and go home. I think what's going on is that the intelligentsia, if it were, or whoever it is that's shaping up, and the leadership that gets elected, it itself, it needs to kind of get grounded again, get grounded in democratic socialism, and then live to fight another day. Because they have, I mean, listen, there was an NDP government in Alberta not too long ago. There's an NDP government in British Columbia, right? There's an NDP government in Winnipeg, in Manitoba. So it's not as if you can say that,
Yeah.
it's the corporations have taken over as the end of the world. I think what is happening is corporations are the world, number one. Let's accept that. Now it is, how do you set up your
Not really.
battle strategy, okay,
Well,
to tackle them, to counter them, to do whatnot. So I think that's the difference that a lot of kind of the left intelligentsia, I kind of quote all these things. There's a new book, I forgot the title, by Vivek Chibar. He's really worth reading. And he's actually talking about how I'll just say that, I forget how old I was, but I remember when Preston Manning, I'm from British Columbia originally, Lower Mainland. And when Preston Manning and the Reform Party started making inroads in BC, you know who were the first people to sign up? I forget about who's funding him, but we all know all that already. The first people to sign up was your average forestry worker, regular worker, right?
yeah.
Okay. And what was happening at that time, the intellectuals and others are bemoaning the class consciousness, or we got to go out and educate them. Where people, you go on the shop floor and find out what is your issue, right? What is going on? It's goddamn wages, it's benefits, it's regular material stuff. And if you have a leadership that can't even talk to that, that's riding a bike and saying, look, I eat vegetarian, that's what you're going to get. So I think as much as I love to have a kind of a broader discussion on the sort of the things going on, I mean, all of this has been covered in the prison diaries. Gramsci has outlined what's going to happen. That's nothing new. We know all this. The issue is, how are you playing the game? Because it is a game of,
Well,
let's call it a battle, call it, right? And are
you
you
can get lost,
playing
you can
to
get
win?
lost in the game. You can get
No.
completely
Yeah, well,
lost and
that's my
screwed in
point.
the
That's my listen. I was like 12. I remember Dave Barrett. I don't know if you remember Dave Barrett. Okay.
Oh yeah, sure.
So Dave Barrett,
Decent premier.
he did a filibuster or whatever that he did. They had to bring in 4 guys to lift him up and move him out of the chamber. Okay. Those were the days where it wasn't like and actually, when, if you remember, Polyev disrespected, he called him something to sing. And
Sellout
but
Singh, I believe.
Singh's,
Yeah.
no, in the house, and the Singh's retort was, "You want to take it outside?" Yeah, F off, right? So what am I saying is that I think now the opportunity is opened up, for the left, that it's not the end of the world. In fact, it opens up even more because Carney is going to shift to the right. He's already shifted, as
Oh,
opposed to some of
he's already shifted. He
he's
shifted
already
as soon as he
shifted
assumed the leadership.
a hell of a lot more than Trudeau. So that space
Can
is
I
open
jump
up,
in,
and I'm just finishing. So
Youri?
then it
Yeah.
really, I think, would depend.
Yeah.
Is
Because I
how
gotta
you,
go soon.
Okay.
okay,
Wait. Bhagwant,
sure.
finish your points, and then Barry. Yeah. Then Barry.
I was just going to
your
say
song.
that for left politics in Canada, there is almost I would say, a near collapse of the Green Party. I think the Liberals are turning towards the center. The Conservatives are going to be forced to actually retreat a bit more and regroup and try to come back again. So there's a whole space. The 6 MPs, they do hold the balance of power, believe it or not. So
7.
there's an opportunity there to do something with that. And if you're just going to do I'll help you survive, which Singh did, well, good luck then. That's what you're going to get. So there's an opportunity to make something. I think they have a chance now to, whoever the next leader becomes, pick someone who's actually got some core understanding of what it is to have a job.
Barry.
Okay, I've got 4 points, and we'll pass the 1 hour mark, so I've got to go pretty soon. Number one, don't miss the forest for the trees. Capitalism is not forever. It's been around for 400 years, but human society has been around for tens of thousands of years, since the Neolithic Revolution. Capitalism has not been around all that time, is not destined to be around forever. Point number two, China. Capital doesn't rule in China. The Chinese Communist Party rules. It's a Stalinist, undemocratic, and those who refuse to do so is part of a growing movement called the lying down movement. But the state-owned enterprises, which are building infrastructure around the world, are not capitalist corporations. There are billionaires in China, almost as many as in the United States, but it's not the same kind of economy. So to say that, well, we have to deal with the box, I think, I'm sorry, with all due respect, misleading. The box has a lot of holes in it. And the reason why Washington now is on a war footing against China and against the countries that don't bow down and kiss the edge of the robe of the imperial wizard, is because it is caught in a contradiction between the mode of production and the relations of production. It can't produce for a market where all of the goods produced are to be sold. So instead, it's aiming for a recession, almost like a consciously created recession, and war to redivide the resources of the world and to reestablish new colonies. The third point is, why is this happening? Well, a factor that needs to be mentioned, I think it was mentioned briefly by both of us, but let's mention it once more. First past the post. First past the post. That is where, strategic voting lives. First past the post. If you didn't have a first past the post system, if you had the electoral system as in 90% of the world where there are elections, including where my good friend and comrade Youri lives in Belgium, every vote counts, and seats are allocated in the legislature, parliament, Congress, whatever you wish to call it, on the basis of the percentages obtained with a threshold. But of course, first, the proportional representation is not a panacea.
Exactly.
One of the most proportionally representative countries, electoral systems in the world is, guess what? Israel, the Zionist apartheid state. It has a relatively low threshold.
I was going to say either the Netherlands or New Zealand, and I can tell you, in New Zealand, you still have the rotten two-party system of the Nationals, which is the Kiwi version of the Conservative Party, or the Labour Party, which is the Kiwi version of the Liberal Party, which depends on coalition. But yeah.
Anyway, my point, you're right. My point is, though, the first past the post system does not reflect the majority public opinion. You can get 35, 30, 42% of the vote and have 100% of the power. Now, the Liberals have a problem. They didn't get a majority, and neither did the Conservatives. So actually, the small parties in Parliament will have an outsized influence on the situation. If the Liberal Party is smart enough in the diabolical sense, they can get the Bloc Québécois to vote for certain things. They even get the Conservatives to vote for anti-labor legislation or more money to big industry, to the private sector. They won't need the NDP vote, but they might occasionally need it, around a budget vote. And that's problematic, and they're gonna, it looks good on them. I hope they have a lot of sleepless nights dealing with it. But my final point is this: outside Parliament is where the action should be, and it's where the action increasingly will be. This Parliament will show that there's a capitalist convergence at the top. The working class will be made to pay for the tariff war. We're going to see more money for the military, less and less money for social services. They're going to cut programs. They're going to lay off federal public service workers. There's going to be a decline in service. People are going to be angrier than they were before the election, angrier than they were. And what are they going to do when that happens? Well, either they'll join far-right organizations and they'll want to hang each of us from a lamppost, or or they'll go to their mass organizations, the unions in the NDP, and let's say, we're angry as hell and we want to fight back. We want a demonstration and we're inviting you to speak. Because we still have to invite the leaders to speak, right? To show to our sisters and brothers in the broad movement that we're trying to be fair. We want all points of view reflected, but we're going to fight the government's anti-worker offensive. That's the key thing. So the real fight is going to be outside Parliament, not inside Parliament. And that's why the color of Jagmeet's turban, well, he's in the past tense now, since he's going to resign as leader, and they're going to choose another one. But he's the new leader is going to say, okay, we've got to fight against this, and we don't have the votes in Parliament to turn Parliament upside down, but or let alone to turn it right side up. Tommy Douglas had that expression: "I'm going to Parliament to turn things upside down, and if you give me a majority, I'll turn them right side up." That's one thing he said. And the other thing he said is in the famous cartoon called Mouseland. Have you seen it?
Nope.
Okay. Well, Tommy Douglas tells the story of the white mice and the black cats. The white mice have been taught that you got to vote for the white cats, not the black cats, because the white cats, they'll redesign the mouse holes so that they're a little bit different. A government of their own class, or their own species. And lack is political education. It's a crisis of political education, which allows the bleeding off of labor union organizations towards the Tories and the Liberals. And it can be countered, not overnight, but it can be countered with a steady diet of class consciousness raising and mass demonstrations in the streets. We're headed for turbulent times. This trade war is not going away anytime soon, and neither are the hot wars. Get ready for class struggle.
All right. Well, Barry, you say you have to go now, right?
Yeah, in the next 5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we were joined. Actually, Barry, if lasting words, what's your historical assessment of Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau just before you go?
Well, Justin Trudeau was, the flavor of the year for a while, and his talk about sunny ways was BS. He increased the military budget. He increased the subsidies to big oil and gas. We saw growing social inequality under the Liberal government, and we're going to see even more of it under Carney, because he doesn't have much of a choice, and he's converging with the Tory agenda, as I argued. Jagmeet Singh is a failure as a politician. He came in with a lot of razzmatazz and high tech social media to his credit. That petered out because it wasn't sustainable. It didn't embody a program. It was all surface features and not foundational elements needed to retool society. We have to produce the things that we need. We have to trade with other countries, not just the one to the south, including with our sisters and brothers in Mexico. We need to fight the tariff bosses, and Jagmeet didn't do any of those things, and he continued in the hyper centralized management style of Jack Layton. Unfortunately, now I know a lot of people watching this are going to think, "Oh, you're criticizing Jack Layton, my goodness." Well, I mean, just check the record. Don't take my word for it. Check the record yourself, and you'll see, who created the highly centralized, poll-driven policies of the NDP. And I mark my word, I'm not telling you any lies.
And lasers,
so that's
and lasers.
my summary. and
And
to
Leighton
and to,
and Leighton also no friends to folks of the global south and so forth, also an imperialist in that
yeah,
respect.
a Zionist on top of everything else. So all of that has to be challenged, and it can be challenged if the NDP allows just a little more democracy. Because the rank and file, they bring resolutions on these subjects. Public ownership, peace and justice, not war, everlasting. They bring them to the convention, and guess what? The convention resolution committee shunts them off to the side, and they say, "Well, we don't have time to talk about that," or "We want to be realistic." All this talk about realism is nauseating. It means no democracy. It means we know better than you. We're your elders. We're the experts. We'll tell you what you should think. And we don't want to hear your silly debate about social justice because you can't win elections that way. Well, I'm sorry. Elections or revolutions have always been, in the final analysis, won on the basis of moral argument and good, sound economic thinking in the interests of the vast majority. For the millions, not the millionaires. That's our slogan. And I urge people watching this to join the NDP Socialist Caucus. Give me a call at 647-986-1917. And I know, Youri, you'll tell more.
Exactly. Socialist. Also check out Socialist Action Canada, and also check out Workers Action Alliance. I believe where folks like
Workers' Action Movement.
Workers Action Movement. Sorry, I keep forgetting that name.
Wham.
I will have a link.
Wham. Wham it to the bosses.
Exactly. Now, Bhagwant, very first of all, thank you for coming on this Sunday, and thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
And we look forward to having you back on in the future.
Thank you
Now,
very much, Youri. Nice meeting you, Bhagwan. All the best.
Thank you, Barry. Likewise.
Now, Bhagwan. Now, I actually have three more questions. I actually have three more questions left for you. So,
Okay.
So now you actually have talked a lot about how the conservatives, starting with Aaron O'Toole, and this actually isn't even just related to just the Conservative Party of Canada, but I think many amongst the global right and the far right have actually been going out of their comfort zone to actually try to convert the working class to their program. It's actually quite fascinating. So in the Netherlands, for example, that's where my father is from. If you look at the programs of a lot of the far right parties and even the traditional center right parties, they all have programs which are very attractive to the working class and to the precarious middle class. We know Donald Trump, although his solutions for the working class are very counterproductive and so forth. But when he first, came on the political scene against Hillary Clinton, he did say that he was going to punish corporations that keep going overseas to Mexico and China, that he would punish them with a 20%, or 26%, hitting them with with the tariff and so forth like that. The Reform Party, in the UK, which wants to do what Preston Manning and the Reform Party did in Canada, unseat the Progressive Conservatives as the real right wing party. Reform wants to do that in the UK with the with conservative parties. I mean, even them, they have programs which, okay, it's not Lenin, but it's definitely programs that will attract the working class and have them think, you know what, this sounds like my kind of party and so forth. So, so we have seen that with this election. In fact, let me even just bring up this. Uh, the unions that supported the conservatives. Many of them, of course, were police unions, but the United Association Local 67, the United Steelworkers Local Union 2251, and the Independent Contractors and Business Associations. So a lot of them supported a lot of them supported conservatives. In fact, even your premier, Doug Ford of the local progressive conservatives, many unions shockingly also supported him. So, do you think that had a big role in why the So long question short. Do you think that had an influence as to why the NDP didn't do as good, and why the Liberals also did fairly good, because the Liberals also had a lot of big endorsement from unions?
Yeah, I think these are really foundational, complex questions, and we can't just wipe them off with polemics or, here's the Communist Manifesto puts it all out, or the Bible or the Quran. Things don't really work like that. We are in
Yeah,
now
exactly.
2025. It's very, very complex politics. Politics has matured in democratic countries in particular, post-Second World War. There's all kinds of dynamics and an organism that we have to understand in and of itself. So I'll get to that in one second, but just before, I don't want to be dismissive of Jagmeet Singh. Jagmeet Singh actually has been on a number of fronts, has been actually a trailblazer. He is the first, I would say, real minority, who got not only elected, but ran 3 elections. And it wasn't one of kind of, whitewashing himself, but he actually stood its ground with his cultural presentation, his realist presentation. And the good news for all of Canada is that people actually, I mean, bunch of stuff happened this election, which I outlined earlier, but generally people didn't take off to him. He did pretty good in 2019, 2021, and so on and so forth, right? So that's something that I think we can celebrate as Canadians. Number one, that we are not like, say, like, what's happening in Holland or even in France, or for that matter, Germany and Italy, that we are actually a multicultural society. And in the context of the multiculturalism, we have minorities, LGBTQ, whatever you name it, indigenous people, running all across the spectrum. So in 2019, as a matter of fact, here's a little fact that Maxime Bernier's right-wing party, which is generally known as the right-wing populist party, had
People's
more
Party, yeah.
Sikh candidates running for him than did the Green Party. Okay. So that just says to you. So when we talk about issues like immigration and whatnot, it isn't just, the bosses wanting to get immigrants. It is actually widespread reaction. I know, for example, a lot of the they're not even immigrants, but sort of students and, temporary workers and whatnot. A lot of them are from India. And I can tell you, I have firsthand knowledge, which is shocking when you hear this thing, of Punjabi Sikh people saying there's too many of them. Okay. And
Yeah.
who actively logging to send them back. You can go on, live radio station and whatnot,
Yeah.
interviewed, and I get these questions asked all the time. So it's integration of identities, but it is also then an emergence of mainstream politics and things are divided. And I think that Singh had a huge role in defining Canada, as it were, right? He's made it easier for anybody now, no matter what they look like, not just the color, what they look like, to just say, hey, I'm going to run for it and give it my shot, right? There was that part. The other is also a phenomena when he comes on the scene. You have to, the context is really important. There's him. He's like, I think he was in his maybe late 30s or 40 something. There's Trudeau, 40 something. There's Pierre Poilievre, 40 something. 3 leaders. The only older person is actually Elizabeth May of the Green Party. But all three main parties are 40 something guys, none of them who had any careers to be noteworthy careers before they joined politics. Singh was provincially for a very brief time, but he's a lawyer, but never had a law practice per se. Poilievre, we know, never had a real job. Trudeau never really had a real job. I mean, what was he known for? What his biggest thing is doing blackface. So these are all guys who come in at a certain time and they play the politics of their time. Okay. It's all performance, it's theatrics. So Singh has TikTok, Poilievre has social media. Trudeau has, the great hair and whatnot. That was a period, and again, I think it's really important, especially if people, are Marxists and whatnot. It wasn't just Marx, but you have to also look at others who've done it. So in this thing, the whole benefit of the dialectic is really important. The dialectic materialism is actually what's getting us to this point in which, at that particular time in our society, the issues are one of we had George Floyd. So what was the reaction to George Floyd? We had Black Lives Matter. We had these kinds of issues which are more demanding of a social reaction as opposed to hard institutional reaction. So I've done a thing on this. Trudeau is flown a lot of money into Black communities, lots. Okay. However, if you look at the incarceration of Black people in Canada, it hasn't made any dent. There's no systemic changes. And people have been celebrating that. They've been buying into that whole thing. So we have to kind of dig deeper and not just get carried away by, oh, well, when will the revolution happen? A revolution ain't happening. When was the last revolution?
Actually, that's a perfect segue then to this question. Isn't that basically what happened with this election, like any election? So,
Yeah.
so I have a friend of mine who lives in England, and she works for a human rights NGO, and right now they're facing severe cuts in funding and even a severe and even lots of firing amongst their staff because the U.S. government is cutting off a lot of their funding because Trump is on his woke, anti-trans ideology, rampage and so forth like that. And I remember, going back to what you were saying about how Trudeau flooded a lot of the Black communities with subsidies and so forth. I once asked both Al Jones and Desmond Cole, what does the Black Canadians, who do they normally vote for in the federal election? Are they more NDP voters or are they Liberal voters? Both of them said to me, Liberal voters, and it's because the Liberal Party always promises to subsidize the Black small businesses and whatnot. And isn't that basically...
I don't think they're correct. I don't think they're correct. If you look at the Black community, is not just sort of a monolith. Unlike, let's say, for example, I would say the Sikh community is a kind of a people, like the Jewish people are a people. So you could just say that's one, but say Muslims are not, because you could be from Indonesia and have a completely different outlook on life versus, say, from Pakistan. And it's the same thing with Black people. So the Black experience in Canada is not just a one simple sort of swoosh. It depends where you're from. So in the early parts, when you had the Caribbean migration, then you could say mostly the Caribbean immigrants were either real leftists, NDP, communist, and whatnot, or Liberal Party. So if you like the first generation, not first generation, but I mean sort of immigrant Blacks, not the indigenous Blacks, you get that pretty much on the left. But they're coming from Caribbean. They're coming from the world of Walter Rodney. They're coming from a world of, Bob Marley. Like that's their training ground. They cannot go to the right. They come from that world, right? But then in the 80s, 90s in particular, now we're starting to get a lot of immigration from Africa. And Africa, whether it's from primarily on sort of west coast of Africa, you're getting a lot of people who are coming with really hard-nosed attitudes on evangelicalisms, right? So if you look at Attorney General of Alberta, for example, I think it's the same as the Black guy. I mean, is more right than Danielle Smith, right? So that phenomenon is happening. If you look at the two predominant in all of cabinet, in all of the House of Commons right now, there's three. When I think of Black people, I think of three people, right? One is Greg Fergus, who is the speaker.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, is not really kind of known per se. He's a classic liberal. He kind of young liberal, then raised his way up and so on and so forth. Then who are the other two? They're conservatives. There's the what's her name? I forget.
Yeah, the doctor though.
The doctor, the lawyer, PhD, right? And
exactly.
I mean, and what did she do?
And then Jamil Javani, who
I'm going to get to Jamil Javani in a second, but what was her claim to fame outside of defending Christianity? I mean, she met with a far right fascist from Italy or Germany, right? Which is like the leader had to just say, no, we don't do that sort of stuff, right? Okay. Then you had Jamil Javani, who is in December, I think it was December or November, was in Washington meeting his buddy J.D. Vance. When Trump is in power, he's already saying tariffs are coming. He could have talked about, I wrote a column on this. He said, hey, listen, give us a break. Don't do it to us. No, he talked about DEI, woke agenda, and defending Christians. So it's not, I think that speaks, and you know, they have the right to their political views and all that. But what I'm saying is that Canada cannot be simply understood on, you know, sort of the old school models. It's an integrated society. Right now, do you know that in this particular election, there have been 22 Sikhs and 23 Punjabi speakers elected in the House of Commons. There's 14 Muslims. Okay. I think there's about either 5 or 6 Jewish people. There's, I don't know, countless evangelicals. The prime minister is a Catholic. Pierre Poilievre is a Catholic. So you can't just simplify things and to kind of break them down and understand. You have to look at a broader dynamic of what is happening, as Gramsci would call in the substructure. The substructure is not the old substructure. The superstructure is actually far more sophisticated, and it cannot be understood in simple polemic terms. It has to be understood very, very detailed and minutely and finely in what things it does. Corporate media you talk about, the number one corporate media in print anyway is a National Post, right? Who did the National Post support? They didn't support the liberals. It was all in for the conservatives, right? So
Yeah,
even the
exactly.
corporate
Yeah.
media is you know, it's a game of money making, and where you can, you know, develop audiences and roll them in. Like, that's the money matters, right? So in terms of, like, if we're looking for their agenda, this gets very difficult. There's money is the agenda, right? We're capitalism, we're capitalist realism. I keep saying it. Now, in terms of the other question that you ask, what happened is that there is a methodology that the superstructure uses, right? Political parties would use. So, which again is something that the NDP missed out because of their preoccupation. Like Barry said, he had it right. Preoccupation with wanting to get elected. They thought that they could with Leighton, that they're this close to it, and of course they pick a guy who's Leighton light even, and he doesn't get in. They get wiped out, and the end of that dialectical process is actually the defeat. But it will emerge again, right? But what there's a two-path thing that happens. Especially what Poilievre would have done is you approach the workers, and it's not the unions. It's not like, you know, again, those are you can debate whether that's the voice or who they're speaking to and whatnot. But let's talk about the individual on the shop floor, right? Whose main thing is show me the money, right? Show me the benefits. Show me the, you know, whatever, a half decent life. And he or she will do whatever in their power to sabotage, whether it's absenteeism, whether it's, you know, putting a wrench in whatever it is. Like, you know, that happens. Like, listen, my mom retired, quote unquote, you know, as a dishwasher in a fast food restaurant. I'm from grade 9 onwards. I know what I'm talking about. It was never the unions that we're looking up to or someone to raise our consciousness about our class status. We couldn't give a two hoots about it. It was, hey, how much do you have to pay to get to work? Because you had to take the bus. That would take you hours to get there. And then what are you getting? Minimum wage, right? So these are the issues. So what happens is this, and this is where the NDP has failed, because it is bringing in people to, you know, raise their consciousness. And the great scene in the last election was Singh standing outside an auto workers plant in Windsor, I think it was, right? And he's trying to shake hands, people, and people just walking around. A woman, she see how he come in and says, "Yeah, I wish I brought my MAGA hat." You have to understand that what is going on over here. Why is he not connecting? Because he can't connect. Connecting isn't just empty words. Isn't just using the word class. It is actually connecting at a visceral level. They say, my brother, I understand you, right? Okay, well, what do you understand about me? Talk further. So there's that part. And on the other hand, what the conservatives did very well is they first come in, they connect at that level. So there's a two-step strategy. The first step is your life is miserable. Okay, it's not safe. You're working your ass off. You're not getting any money, right? Okay, the corporations are taking all this. Pierre Poilievre actually gave a talk. He was on Bay Street, and he gave a talk down to Bay Street corporate heads, saying you're letting down the working class. Okay, this is something to be learned. So that's step one, to resonate with the working class. Say, he speaks for me. Okay. Step two, because I know I'm not going to do anything, and neither is anybody else, frankly, is to then to say, you know, it's crime, it's the immigrants, it is. But the step one is absolutely critical. And they were masters at that this time around. And the NDP, on the other hand, has no step one. It assumes that it's step one. And its step two is talk about airy-fairy topics, which when the guy's saying, so does that mean I got a bigger paycheck if you guys form the government? Doug Ford said you get a bigger paycheck. Doug Ford said, I will protect auto workers. There's going to be 5,000 workers over my dead body. Like, he used that language. What did the others do? It was all kinds of crafted sound bites and, speaking points which don't resonate. You have to resonate at a very human, visceral level. Otherwise, yeah, this is great talk for the student union and, poli-sci 101. And you see the results. Sorry, I'm kind of going off on a thing here, but
that's very interesting. But sort of going back to the friend of mine who works for an NGO, and in fact, we should just call NGOs what they really are: semi-NGOs. Because if you're depending on a government for your funding, okay, then you're not really an NGO; it's a semi-NGO. And I think from what I've heard from both Al Jones and Desmond Cole is that the black sort of like the black business community certainly loves a liberal government because the liberal government always claims that they're going to subsidize their businesses and so forth. And I think that's what Doug Ford did. I think that's how Doug Ford has managed to court votes is he goes to some of those communities which are overlooked, which are sort of forgotten, and talks to the guy who has a small business owning a night shop or whatever and says, do you guys need tax relief? Do you guys need a subsidy and stuff like that? And I think,
yeah.
And I think when we talk about why does the Canadian left do counterproductive voting, own voting, tactical voting, I think it's because a lot of the Canadian leftists do work in NGOs or they do work in honorable NGO, which it could be an indigenous charity, or it could be some refugee group that tries to help refugees come to Canada, or some kind of a noble cause and so forth. But they'll need a liberal government to do all that because it's the liberal government that says they believe in foreign aid and does fund a lot of those groups. And I think is that and then do you think that played a part again in why we see
I don't think that played a part either. I think it was a bigger part what I explained to you earlier in terms of how the people's perceived or real fears and who was able to give voice to them. In terms of the NGOs, let's take the case of Haiti, right? Is a really good example.
Yeah.
So Haiti, Canada's primary kind of other than the sort of military interventions, it's mostly NGO work, right? And if you look at who goes to Haiti, it's actually Quebec NGOs. Okay, so the NGOs there's nothing honorable about NGO. It's a business under the rubric of capitalism. It's subsidized by somebody, right? Sometimes private corporations actually have big funders, right? As well as governments and so forth. But that becomes an end unto itself. It's a process of getting more and more grants. So if you're going to, in the year 2000, I was in Cuba, right, to protest the blockade, right? And we went there. We went with a group of people that did for we're going to take bicycles and soccer balls and whatever. And you go there and you see the well that they're digging. When you could actually set up a water treatment plant and you talk to the Cubans, not the sort of rank and file Cubans, the Cubans who are actually running the country or whatever, they are very straight up. We need foreign direct investment. Okay. We don't need NGOs. NGO is serving the Canadian political interests. So the NGOs in Quebec, in Haiti, is actually a means to get for the liberals mostly, because when you look at under Harper did not feed a lot of the NGOs in Haiti, but Trudeau, liberals, all the time they do that. That's their thing to get the Quebecers to say, doing good work. What have you done good work in Haiti? Nothing. Ain't nothing happening, right? You know who did good work in Haiti? Chavez. It's called Petrocaribe, right? So what I'm saying to you is that we have to look at these things in what these instruments are, what are these processes, structures, who do they serve, why do they serve, and then just say, okay, well, whatever interest is that wants to get to power, it's a game about power. What are the techniques? And if we understand that, then we have a fighting chance. They say, "Ah, okay, I understand what's really going on, and I'm going to operate on my own personal values and whatnot, and vote or this or that guy, right?" Doug Ford, you mentioned, right? I've done a lot of. I have an NGO, by the way, and in Somalia for women's education, so I know the Somali community very, very well. And you could say whatever about Doug Ford and like his policy and all that, it doesn't really matter. But when it comes to don't forget, there was a video of his brother who was a mayor, right?
Yes.
Talking it up with some Somalis in an apartment building in in that neighborhood in Toronto. What I'm saying is that they are they appear, whether they are or not, it doesn't matter. They appear as regular people. Oh yeah, that could be the guy that I went to high school with, as opposed to the Michael Ignatieff, or to be, the kind of, oh, uppity da and whatnot, yeah. That's part of that stuff matters when people vote. Do you resonate? Can I connect with you? I have a friend who's, I'll tell you, it's a true story, hardcore Caribbean background, right? Uh, and he was getting his gas car filled, and there's Doug Ford in front of him. Doug Ford goes to and he's got a fancy car. He's not a poor fellow or nothing. Goes in and comes out, pays his thing, comes back, and he says, "Here, I got you a Coke," right? And he goes, "Oh, geez, thanks." Uh, and it was just, he's the premier. Mostly premiers that have like bodyguards and standoffish. Oh, could I take a selfie with you? And my friend, who's a ardent student of CLR James and absolutely Walter Rodney, was flabbergasted. Says, "My God, the guy." It was as if I'm talking to some schmo that I work with. That stuff matters.
Yeah.
I'm telling you. And
Yeah,
our
yeah,
friend
no,
Jagmeet Singh's
and in Britain, Nigel Farage practices that perfectly.
absolutely. Those guys exactly. You got it. So
Oh,
anyway,
fascinating, fascinating. Well,
okay.
before we close, my second to last question is, you once did bodybuilding, correct?
Did you have to bring that up? Yeah,
I wanted to ask that question because I've not had
I
the
still
chance
do.
to read Arnold Schwarzenegger's book.
Well, good
But I
for
was
you, man.
curious, but I was curious I was curious if you've read the book, and yeah.
No. Yeah, I used to do competitive natural bodybuilding. I'm still, I'm an old guy, but I still am active. But yeah, if you ever, I think I offered you if you ever want to
Yes, in
talk
the
about it, I'd
future,
be more than
yeah,
happy
definitely.
to. Yeah. So,
Bhagwan, because it's the first time, because it is your first time on the show, we have to close the show, and we usually close the show with our first time guest doing the questionnaire that was done by Marcel Proust, later Bernard Pivot, the late Bernard Pivot, and later the late great James Lipton of Inside the Actors Studio. So it's your turn to do. So it's your turn to do this before you enjoy the rest of your Sunday, which
okay,
is
thank you.
Bhagwat. What is your favorite word?
My favorite what?
Favorite words.
Word?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I'm a man of words, actually. Philosophy, I would say.
Okay. What is your least favorite word then?
Anything that's sort of simplest, uh, it's I can't think of it. It would be anything that just sort of reduces complexity to simple
Okay,
or
perfect.
easy. That's easy. Yeah.
All right, then what turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
To be honest, in my youth, it started with my own ethnic and cultural background, which was the philosophy of Sikhism. I'm Sikh as well. But over the last 4 or 5 years, as I'm getting older and whatnot, I have to say it's a Western philosophical tradition. So from Descartes, Hegel, Sartre, so all the great ones. Yeah, I would say Michel Foucault. Uh, I read those
Fascinating.
quite. Yeah,
And then what turns you off then?
nothing really, because as I'm getting older, uh, more the curiosity is becoming even more greater. So conversations that are, like we had today, they're a pleasure. And even if someone is not on the same page or wavelength with me, it's always still fun to say, what makes them tick, what's going on. So I can't think of anything that turns me. Maybe. Here's one for you, you love. Uh, Ultra processed foods turn me off. Yeah, processed foods, period.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
What what's your favorite curse word? And given your South Asian background, it can be in any language. So it can be in, yeah.
Oh, well, my background is South Asian, but I'm not. My upbringing is all Canadian, so I can't. And one of the things is, I don't know if you. Well, your mom is from another culture, but like you can't swear, right? To swear in a language, you have to live that language,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So I haven't lived that culture, but I speak it, but it sounds very formal when I speak it. So I'd say, uh, fuck off.
Okay.
That comes like very easy.
then
Yeah, fuck off.
then what sound or noise do you love, followed by what sound or noise do you dislike?
What noise?
What sound or noise do you love, and what sound or noise do you dislike?
Oh, I wouldn't say it's noise, but recently I've gotten quite deep into the music that comes from the Tuareg in the Niger area. So I've been listening. I actually attended a concert with, well, I won't mention the singer, but they play like electric guitar. I don't know if you know that particular. It's like Jimi Hendrix and so forth, right?
Yeah.
So that music, I would say the noise, if it is, or the sound of that music turns me on a lot. I love it. And what turns me off is
And then yeah, a sound you dislike then
a
would be
sound is not, I can't really nothing really. I can't think of anything. I don't know, a
okay.
dog barking maybe.
A dog barking can be very, very annoying. And then, what profession, if you weren't doing the great opinion pieces you do for the Hill Times and so forth, so if you weren't doing that, what profession would you love to do?
Oh, anything that could earn me a nice fat paycheck, period. That's it.
Yes,
Paycheck matters, man.
exactly, exactly. And I do resonate with that song. I want to be a
But to be
billionaire.
honest, I would say like if I had to do it all over again, and if it wasn't for my immigrant parents pushing in a certain direction, probably a university professor in liberal arts. I would have probably done that.
Okay, and then, what profession would you absolutely not want to do under any circumstances?
Uh, if it again, I'm not trying to be smart ass here, but uh, if it comes down to, earning a living, I mean, we did clean toilets. What am I talking about? When, we lived 8 people in a one-bedroom basement apartment. Uh, so no, there's nothing. If we used to do, we picked blueberries. My mom and I, we picked blueberries in Vancouver uh, entire summer for like full time. So depending on my circumstances are, if we're, way down in dumps, I'll do whatever that pays well. But I guess as you move up, then you can be more selective. But yeah, university professor would be a good one.
Okay,
But yeah,
and in terms of a profession you absolutely would never want to do, I think. Well, you've done a lot of.
no, as a job's a job.
Okay, interesting. And then lastly, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say as you arrive at the pearly gates, or whatever is your vision or belief in the afterlife? And you've mentioned Sikhism, and even if you're an atheist, please feel free to please do answer the question.
Well, I think if God exists, it wouldn't be God asking me the question. It'd be me asking him or her, where the hell have you been? Yeah.
Interesting. Well,
All right.
okay, we'll leave that. We'll leave it at that. Well, we were joined in this edition of One Plus One. We were joined by two guests. Let me read them out again. Uh, we were joined by Barry Weisleder of Socialist Action Canada, a member of NDP's Socialist Caucus and the Workers' Action Movement, which tries to get leftists in positions of powers in the union so they can wham into the bosses. And we're also joined by first-time guest Bhagwant Sandu, he's a leftist and a left-wing activist in his own right, involved in various people-powered movements, including the anti-imperialist movement, and he often writes opinion pieces for the Hill Times. Bhagwant, thank you so much for coming. It was a real honor to finally get the chance to talk to you voice to voice. And folks, oh yes, and folks, don't forget, please donate to 1+1 if you can. Do share our episodes past and wisely. And it's very curious to be what the next chapter of this, what the next chapter of Canada it holds for us. But all we can say is good night and good luck. Keep on fighting. There's still a lot because there's still a world to fight for. So, ciao till then.
Thank you.